Gillian, I hope so. We will jump into another video, though. This one's from Morphologis, and it's 2 days ago. It came out, and it's called Star Citizen's Endgame Content Could Be Amazing. Could be. Of course. That's why we're all here, is because things could be amazing. But they haven't proven it yet. So let's see what Morph has to say, what this video is all about.
Star Citizen is nowhere near complete, but every patch brings us a little bit closer to a more finished game, albeit sometimes at a slower pace than some of us wish. Still though, today players can enjoy a number of professions and activities that offer enough gameplay to keep at least some of us busy for a while. However, sooner or later players inevitably run up against the wall that is the unfinished state of Star Citizen. Put plainly, there really isn't much progression after you play the few loops that there are, let alone an end goal or end game. And arguably, since all the ships are available on the web,
I can already see the comments. But Morphologis, Star Citizen is a sandbox, and you can do whatever you want, and there is no end game, and there is no winning. Therefore, the game is not pay to win.
Website for purchase with real money, it makes them a bit counterfeit as a form of end-game stuff. So then what is it exactly that our chosen professions are going to add up to? More accurately, what goal do we strive for as an organization of players?
As a matter of fact, Morphologis, you should go back to reviewing architecture and stop having opinions.
Well, one possibility would be stations, or organization-owned stations. So join me then on this dive into what the future might hold for Star Citizen when it comes to players building stations. But don't...
Well, guess what? They just while they were in Asia, right? Didn't Xylo say something about we will not own stations when somebody asked there? And yeah, that was a tough pill for me to swallow personally. I hope what they mean is we will not own Lagrange point stations, and we might be able to own something smaller. Well, and I think the control them is, just preventing people from landing. I don't think, you could maybe control them in the same way you control Jump Town, where it's not really, you're not even in control of it, right? So I also agree. Anything coming out of anyone's mouth at that event is to be taken with an insane grain of, like salt or sand or whatever the phrase is, because it's not likely to have any weight to it. They were in Asia to gather as many users as possible. And I think a lot of things that were said out there seemed entirely filled with BS. So personally, I think they mean the Lagrange points, and obviously the Lagrange points have armistice zones, but they're unlocked where you can fire weapons, and then there's security there, and I think that's what they mean, is that you can lock them down and not really control them. So I think they should have went into more detail with that, but I think owning a space station is an absolute necessity for organization-based gameplay. And yes, we do have the Kraken and other larger ships, but the ability to build something static that can be competed over, I've talked about this in a few videos and streams in the past. I think orbits around planets and moons should have like a certain number of locations that you can build certain types of stations, and those should be competed over or create some sort of like a real estate market or something like that. Those are my experiences that I loved from other games. So if you can create these like static locations that around a Daymar, for example, maybe there are 5 locations that you can place a station at, and the people who are able to complete that really difficult task of gathering the material, paying for the for the property location from, Crusader Industries or something. And like, these are the locations where you'll be able to, maybe do like higher level crafting or whatever, right? I'm really pie in the sky here, but how can you talk about Star Citizen's Endgame without imagining and being extremely high on copium, right? Because they have never talked about an Endgame ever. It may not exist, right?
Don't forget that if by the end you think I did a good job with this video and you think I deserve it, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. You can also find me over on my Twitch channel by the same name, as well as on TikTok and Twitter. X. Now it's called X. So to be upfront with you here, very little of Star Citizen's planned endgame is actually understood. The only really significant thing they've ever discussed was the ability for us to obtain the Bengal carrier in the game.
And as of now, this could be entirely bullshit too, right?
Something that would only exist in 4 different locations and thus would be limited in the ability for orcs to obtain them. They would also require being captured and repaired, so it's not something that you can just buy. However, only a few orgs are likely ever going to have the resources to compete for it. And once it's obtained, the only way that anybody else is going to get their hands on it is if they fight the org that has it for that big ship. And that surely is going to be exciting for those competing for the Bengal. But as I said...
But again, it's like a military ship. So like, don't you think, and I think Morph will probably touch on this, but things like stations or other ships that have like more functionality outside of being what is a carrier that just carries ships and, has some decent firepower. The idea of having like better, more efficient, higher level production that can make maybe better ship armor or weapons, or they do seem like they are going down a crafting route. They have touched on this a lot, so now you can start to speculate on those things a little bit. If stations were the only places that you were able to do these efficiently, that would be a route that you can go. I just don't. Listen, I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't think it is. There's
only so many of them, and there's going to need to be something else for people to do, some other type of endgame as an alternative or to do alongside seeking the Bengal. Well, right. It just might...
Like, the endgame can't be the Bengal, because the Bengal is entirely combat-focused, and there are players that are incredibly non-combat focused in this game. What do they do for their endgame? Right? And then how do all those things work together symbiotically to make a really cool, living, breathing universe?
Be player-owned stations, at least organization-owned stations to be more specific. These would be smaller stations than what we have now, Lagrange points or floating around planets and moons. These wouldn't compete necessarily with them, but would offer some benefits to encourage players and organizations to get them. They could, say for example, offer larger organization storage for ships, money, and vehicles. They could have org headquarters, a place to call home, to meet and to decorate, a place
more
to
efficient
respawn,
repair,
a tax collection source for them to make money, a manufacturing base for crafting the things that you need as well as selling them, a place to make ship parts and ship weapons, character armor, character weapons, and even ship industrial parts. There are frankly a lot of opportunities and benefits that you could tag along with stations. But the actual gameplay is going to come along with the process of getting it, maintaining it, and defending it. So let's go through the potential process of getting a station that could be within the bounds of Star Citizen's universe and mechanics as we know them today. So the first phase would be in choosing the location for your organization to establish a station. Stations wouldn't...
I mean, this is exactly what I want out of the game. I just don't think they're going to do it, sadly. I don't know how you wouldn't go in this direction, right? Like, what other endgame can you... I think endgame is the wrong word, and that's what I'm hooked on. And it's the title of the video and everything. But what, like, high-level goals do you think groups are going to want to achieve? Right? I wouldn't want that. I believe fixed locations are better. These are fixed locations. So you're going to have ground locations, and these would be like limited space that could be also around a moon. And like, this is a space game, so we have to remember that too, right? Like, yes, we will be going up and down, in and out of atmosphere on planets. But if the only place that we're going to be building is on the surface of a moon or planet and not in space, that's kind of weird. He said, go deep in space and choose where you place a station or something. I think he's assuming that it might be a performance issue to have these things, so they won't do it. But for me, it's okay. I'm reading another thing in chat that I think is a good thing to touch on, right? Like in Albion Online, it'll just be ego mostly, and some control in black zones, which is a 0 security, high reward zone. That, basically there are tier 8, which is the highest tier materials that are within your like properties coverage and are easy to for your guild to gather those extremely high value materials, right? And then you could sell them, or you can turn them into better armor, weapons, whatever. So for me, I think the exact examples that Morph is giving is more of the Ultima Online or Star Wars Galaxies route, which is location actually matters. So we're going to let him cook a little bit here, and then we'll add to it our feelings as well.
Come pre-built. These are something that organizations would have to build, and I envision this happening in 2 ways for getting a place to build a station. The first option would be find a place in a safe and controlled area of space, somewhere in what you might call high-sec or high-security space, a place like the Stanton system. But this option would have a rental-only option for those claims. You couldn't own them as an organization since the space was already owned by an either government organization or private organization from the NPC factions. But the benefit of this would be good security as well as high traffic areas that could yield good profits for the owning organization. There would, however, be only a set number of locations at Lagrange points, moons, and planet orbital points that you could obtain as an org, and probably there should be a maximum amount of these things that you could actually claim so that you would leave the place open for other people to give it a try. It would also not require just currency, but also reputation with the owning NPC faction. You would have to be in good standing with them in order to qualify to make the claim. Everyone in the org then would need to work together to gain a reputation with that organization so that they could get the cash to get the claim. The second option might be a little bit more exciting. It would involve you going to a lower security area that was less controlled and maybe unowned by any official organization. These systems would have high potential for profits due to rare resources and low competition, but importantly, the risk would be very high. Here then, instead of paying an organization for the claim, you would have to go there and claim it yourself while it's contested by either players or NPCs. Alternatively, if the area is already claimed by an NPC pirate faction like say the Ninetales, then you would have to have a good rep with them in order to not incur constant attacks on your station. These are the 2 options then for both combat and non-combat, lawful and unlawful players who will now all have methods to get into this endgame content as an organization. Getting a claim though is only the start, and the real work would begin after that. So let's move on to the next phase.
It did have a warning of high level of hopium, right? There was definitely a warning here. Now, about location, I think the big part here is that it's not just security that he touches on, but it's the number of players that are acting in these systems and playing in these systems, because what is the point of owning these, right? It's a lot of the point is, like we talked about in Albion, is ego. That's going to be a big thing, right? Like if an org is in control of a lot of these locations, then that gives that org what? I think it gives them a good reputation in the community. It gives them clout and all that stuff, right? But what will these stations actually be doing? Why would you want them, right? What gives these stations power? Well, there would probably be a console somewhere where you can decide what you're buying and selling from these locations, what the taxes, maybe you can't decide what you're buying and selling, but what tax rate you'll have. And, what maybe what tier, like if you want to go down the route of like an objectively not great game, but also kind of a good game. I think Albion does this as well, but what type of and what level of crafting stations are at these locations? So are you a refinery? Do you have a security station? What sort of services are you going to provide at your station? There's no way that a single player-owned station should be able to compete with the Lagrange point with the amount that they can perform. But what if they can do a single thing very well? So, for example, refining. What if they can have more efficient and better refinery processes, but they do them at a smaller scale? And then, you can charge a certain percentage fee for your org mates and a certain percentage fee for other people. And how do you maintain these? Well, you might need to maintain them by making sure that there's always oxygen and fuel and certain things. But the real thing would be paying taxes to the location, like Crusader or whatever. So you're going to need to make money, but you don't want to set the taxes so high that nobody uses it, right? So there's lots of like choices here, and then maybe there's a way to maybe it's very difficult to maintain, and therefore that's what's like maintaining the action of your org and so on, right? The idea of the game being a sandbox and having an end game are things that can definitely be symbiotic and go hand in hand, right? It's the org's choice to want to have one of these facilities. And that's what their goal is to maintain it, or a number of these facilities, right? Something like that. So it's still so sandboxy, but you're being nudged a little bit in a certain direction, and I think it's really great. Oh, the music was loud. Sorry.
In this phase, the construction would begin, and it would involve industrial players as well as combat players if the station is located in hostile, contested space. The industrial-focused players would be tasked with obtaining specific kinds of resources needed for the manufacture of the main superstructure, or the foundation, if you will, of the organization's station. While these resources are collected and deposited on location,
what's going to prevent larger orgs from taking over bases and smaller orgs? Well, I think depending on the system that you're in, right? Maybe it's really highly contested in a place like Pyro, but in a place like Crusader, you would need to you would need to not pay the fee to maintain it, and then it opens up to be, it goes on a market and people can bid to take over or something like that, right? But in a system like Pyro, it would be competed over with, maybe certain times it's available to be, taken over by combat or something like that. I don't know. I mean, again, this is all just super imagination shit. It's not real life.
If the claim is in hostile space, the collection point may need to be defended. Defense could come in the form of either players or player-built turrets. This wouldn't be a very short phase. It would require a great deal of resources and time of an organization to complete, weeks and maybe months. The more players, the faster the resources could be collected, but the build time, I would say, should be a function of an automated mechanic for the station slowly appearing as resources are gathered.
For sure.
I would prefer it not to involve an expensive player ship if possible, but it's inevitable that it might, seeing as how that's how Star Citizen funds the project. So we might see an alternate version then.
Here's the thing is, they're just going to sell the station for real money.
Of the pioneer that builds these stations. Once the main superstructure is finally complete, the cladding is built, the outside is done.
Like if anyone thinks they're gonna do this and not sell the fucking station, is insane. The only way that there's gonna be player-owned stations is if they sell them for real money as well. And that's why this game, I'm not sure. They have to prove to me that they're not going to do that, right? And I really hope they don't do it, because there's so much potential for things like this to just be amazing. But like, where's the line of what they'll sell and what they won't? I don't think any of us know where that line is yet, so we don't really trust them to not do it, right?
It would then be time to start filling the station with components that augment its functionality, as well as building up the station's defenses to defend it while you continue to build the inside. Let's move on then to Phase 3.
They've already sold the land plots.
With the initial
but
phase
not
complete, all you would have is a basic landing pad, maybe a hangar, with a basic lobby and a basic level of inventory for the org. To get the station to be profitable, though, is going to require a bit more time. Station customization and specialization would then be necessary. The first step in this phase might be to create an administration office, which would enable you to tax the refueling and repair modules that you could build onto the station to repair and refuel ships that stop by. This could begin to create a source of income for the organization to pay for the initial upkeep and cost of the station. Next, though, would be the specialization of it through specialized facilities. For organizations that do industrial stuff, they might install a small refinery and resource collection pod for depositing goods. They might also install things to sell those goods, like kiosks to sell stuff to players visiting.
But the problem is, what will make the high tier stuff be expended? What do you mean?
The creation of other manufacturing modules could also be added, things that could create weapon modules and modules for ships. It could also be used to be sold again for a profit or to supply org activities. Internally, the org might also then choose to add facilities like food sellers, hubs for logging on and off, and probably some basic medical facilities that could maybe have one bed that allows you to recover somebody who's died. I don't want to make this...
So players don't have infinite high tier stuff? Well, I mean tiers of stations, dude, and that takes you... the stations consume high tier materials, right? Like, and then there's obviously the creature comforts that everybody needs. They need atmosphere inside the station. They need water. They need food, right? Yeah, it's all upkeep.
Too much like an alternate to main stations, it still needs to be balanced to make those main stations better than the ones that orgs can have, at least in my view. Then you might also, say, add on additional landing pads or additional hangars to support more player ships and more player inventory. But the customization of the interior could be beyond just utilitarian. Adding stuff like bars and additional places to lounge with the org would also be a welcome part of this functionality. Maybe using the player-facing version of Rastar to organize the internal layout to the preference of the organization.
All right, here's my problem with this specific thought process, is he's essentially describing the Lagrange point stations and, orbit stations that we have now. Like, he's describing something way too big. I think with the hangars and stuff and the pads, sure. But in terms of what a station does, I think you need to be extremely limited in what you can put inside of it, which forces you to specialize in something, right? Because they need to be smaller for performance reasons. They need to be... that you can't be a catch-all, otherwise every station would be everything, and I think that would be kind of boring. I think, as an org, if you're going to own one of these, you have to make a choice of what you want it to be. So you can look in the area and see what other stations are there, and if you can fill a gap or do something better than somebody else or whatever, but you have to make choices. That's what I would like to see. I think he's right about, like, sure, there should be an admin office, so refueling is a thing and repair, but maybe that, you can only do certain levels of it. Medical and things like that should probably be there, but again, tiered. And then from there, it's a choice of, what are you going to have, right? What are you going to supply? Because I think that they should be just giant crafting platforms. They should either be a giant crafting platform or storage platforms. And crafting is also considered refining, in my opinion. Crafting / processing. That's how I look at it.
However, for the sake of balance, there would also need to be a limit to the station's module amount. Again, to prevent these stations from
have 10 modules to choose from, but only 3 are able to fit at one of these.
Foreshadowing the main NPC faction stations. There would also probably need to be a mechanic to give benefits for specialization. Say, for example, the station has mostly refineries, it could boost the refining capability of that station for the org. And now it's time to move on to
what did he say? What did he say? Sorry, I want to listen back to this, because I think he added something that's like in Conan Exiles that I think would be so cool to have in this game.
Again, to prevent these stations from overshadowing the main NPC faction stations. There would also probably need to be a mechanic to give benefits for specialization. Say, for example, the station has mostly refineries, it could boost the refining capability of that station for the org.
Okay, I misunderstood, but like what would be super, super sick is if you took it to an even more granular level on who you hired, like what NPCs you hired to run certain locations. Like, you know, having really high-level refinery NPCs that are running your refinery for you, and they cost certain amount of money, but are able to provide the people who are using your facility with additional stuff. Would be amazing.
Now it's time to move on to the final phase, because after you've customized your station, that's not the end of it. The final phase would be maintenance, defense, and fees. Once a station has been fully customized and built to the organization's specifications,
no surprise.
The major gameplay surrounding the station will involve maintaining the station and defending it from various foes. Additionally, as modules are added, the rental fee and maintenance upkeep would also increase. If CIG wanted to get really in-depth with it, they could also do things like involve the maintenance with the engineering mechanics that they're planning to integrate, where modules and fuses have durability.
Do you see what he just flew by? Right? Like a huge, you know, that's where you're going to store your, and repair and rearm and all that, your big capital ships.
That results in them needing to be replaced after a duration of time or after they've been damaged. So then, as you might guess, my idea is also to make these stations vulnerable, as permanent stations would lead to all the available slots on all the servers eventually being taken and leaving no room for new orgs to participate. Simply uncapping the amount of locations you can have for stations would also lead to some pretty undesirable effects. I would guess that you'd get an overpopulation of invulnerable stations, cluttering every single system eventually.
I don't think every station should be able to be taken over in every system. I think, you know, certain security levels should determine how they are, you know, removed and so on. Other games that I played, like if you didn't pay for a certain amount of time, then they would go into a state of disrepair and then eventually disappear, but then would drop all of the inventory space. Like whatever is in inventory just is available, like the station disappears and all of the inventory is just sitting there for people to take, as well as the location for somebody to place their like blueprint to build, which is amazing. So are we talking about Eve? No, we're talking about Star Citizen, but yeah, right? So for me, like a high-sec system would, you know, if you didn't pay your taxes, then the station would go into a state of disrepair and people would be able to, you know, contest it or whatever, maybe something like that. But in a pyro system, it's always in contention. And yeah, because what I would like to see is a situation where you do run out of room quite quickly and players then create their own kind of real estate market with these. So buying and selling good locations to each other. You buy a location, you build it up, and then you sell it to players, and then you move up in the world and buy a better system, you know, a better station that's for sale or something like that.
I saw it happen with Star Wars Galaxies with player-owned cities before they eventually were cleaned up. Stations then in high security would occasionally be attacked by pirates, but their primary drain would be in the rental fees and maintenance fees. Being in high security and having high traffic would lead to a lot of wear and tear, meaning that a station that's not being actively maintained would very quickly become inoperable and eventually would be condemned by the local authorities.
Yeah, we're on the same page.
Leaving the owning organization a set duration of time to return and fix the station and pay the outstanding fees, lest the station will be dismantled, leaving that location open for others to claim.
Yep.
For low security stations, their issues would be in another area. It would be in resisting both player and NPC attacks. In order for this to be fair though, those across the globe in different time zones would need to have some time to react to their station being attacked. So my proposal would be for them to adapt something like what EVE Online did, where you're given a set amount of time after the station has been attacked. The way it works is that when the station is attacked by NPCs or players, they initiate this invulnerability by damaging the station and destroying defensive structures, like turrets, for example. Once the damage threshold is met, the station then becomes invulnerable, giving that 1 to 2 day duration for the other organization to
I think this is like way too detailed design.
mount a defense. This will of course mean that high security stations would be very hard to siege, as attackers would have to constantly contend with the security forces of that system in the form of both NPCs and non-org related player bounty hunters. Again though, these high-sec stations would have a steep rental and maintenance cost associated with them, so they have to deal with their own set of issues. This final phase then is meant to be a constant activity for the organization that owns it. It's the endgame content. It will constantly require an influx of new materials and money to support its existence, driving organization activities and giving them some semblance of agency over the universe of Star Citizen. It will be the nexus of the player organization where you can build your organization's wealth, support your organization's activities, whatever they might be. It might also be an important way to have a place to call home for your org, a place that you can gather, a place where you can have your logo outside the station and on the door.
Your flag.
And I think with all of this, it doesn't actually just need to be stations. I wanted to use that as an example because it's not been discussed before. It can also be applied to ground outposts owned by orgs. All of these mechanics I've discussed could be part of those outposts. In fact, I think that they should be. And it should also be part of the Bengals endgame mechanics, in my opinion. But what do you think? How does this kind of endgame content driving organization activities sound? Or do you feel that a single player should be able to do every bit of content in Star Citizen without needing anybody's help? I personally don't think that that's the point of MMOs, but I know some people might have that perspective. Let me know down in the comment section below. And if you like this video, you know what to do. I hope to see you guys in the next one.
Can I be a burrito barman on your station, Mike? Sure, if you really want to be. But yeah, I mean, I think I've shared a lot of what I feel when it comes to these. I think that player agency, player ownership, and systems of very, out there and out of what seemingly out of reach things for single players, but, really large groups that benefit everybody around them. Goals like that are paramount for games like this. Again, Star Citizen is a sandbox, so it's your choice whether or not you want to engage with that. But the bonuses that you get from doing it are, worth it, right? That's basically how sandbox games work, in my opinion, is yes, you can go out there and do whatever you want, but there's like these little systems that push you in these directions because you get more efficient or have more access to certain things by doing certain tasks, right? Whether it's crafting or combat or whatever, it's again your choice to do what you want. But if you engage with certain systems, you get cooler stuff that happens. And I think this is like an absolute no-brainer and is a must-have in a game like this. Like, how can you say you're building a universe simulator without allowing players to build space stations in some way or have ownership over something in some way like that, right? Like, you can't give the title of universe sim without doing something like that. It's in every sci-fi game. It's in every sci-fi movie. It's in every sci-fi TV show. Like, you just can't do that and say that you're going to do those things. So in my opinion, it's an absolute must. And I don't even think that's extending the scope of the game. I think that should have, in my mind, that was always the scope of the game. If you're doing it on a planetary surface, you should be able to do it in 0G as well, right? Imagine a casino module for a space station. Exactly. Like, the limits are and should be like quite wild and wide, and it's just up to CIG to build out these things, and the time it takes to do that is the time it takes. But yeah. So all we need is Eco and Star Citizen? No. That's too player involved, right? Like Star Citizen is definitely this mix of player run economies and, simulated economy. And I do think that there should be these elements of player run things. Like if you go to the player run station, you get access to something that you wouldn't get if you go to the Lagrange point station, but it might cost you more. Or you might have to go out of your way a little bit. It might be in a system that's unsafe. You might need to have permissions to go there or whatever, right? So there, again, no real limits to where this can go because we don't know what the limits of Star Citizen are yet.